This is item 17, development contributions.
My name's Grant MacKinnon. I've been developing apartments in central Christchurch since 1995. I'd like to ask that the DC rebate scheme be extended, and to do that I'll just give some quick background, some guts of it, and then I'll come to a couple of technical things which actually have quite a big impact as well. One of the very first things I'd like to say is that it's often thought that central city living in Christchurch is something new. In fact, it's the oldest part of the city that has ever been lived in. People have lived in the central city first when they came here, and they've been living here since. It's all the other suburbs that have come along after, and that includes Ngāi Tahu before as well. The first apartments were actually built in the early 1900s. Most of them have gone now after the earthquakes, but around the 1920s. There has always been, in my experience since 95, a high demand for central city living, but a really low uptake. We always get lots and lots of people through our open homes and looking at our apartments. Lots and lots of people want to come in. We can't quite turn them into active living sales, if you like, but there's a lot and lots and lots of demand. If I can explain it like this, if you go to an open home in the suburbs during the weekend and there's say 100 people going through that open home, there might be 60, 70, 80 of them that would trigger and do something. They'd activate and buy or sell and move. 100 people looking in town, you'll only get about 20 or so that will activate, so it's a far lower sum. But you can see that if we do activate them and that level rises, there is an ability for the city to really achieve that number of people that we want to get in the central city. The main problem that we've always had is simply the high cost of development in the central city. I'm sure you've all seen the values and prices, and then you'll compare it to what you get in other parts of the city, and it's simply high. It's really hard to avoid all of those costs, except perhaps this one we're talking about today. The competition for us is, and it's good to have this background knowledge, is the fringe CBD suburbs. So when people come in and look at one of my apartments or a townhouse, the competition they will look at is the fringe townhouse. So they'll look at Maryvale, or they'll look at Addington, or perhaps St Albans, or somewhere like that, and that's where they go to. If it's just a little bit too high, they'll fall back and they'll move to the outside, so you end up with a bit of a donut with this hole in the middle. So it really is cost. There's plenty of demand, but the competition from those fringe CBD suburbs is the real difficulty for us. And that's where this DC rebate scheme has really helped since the earthquakes. I see there have been a few different numbers flying around on the actual amount that's incurred per dwelling. In my experience, that sum, if I just run through some quick numbers, is about $20,000 to $25,000 as a cost to us. That's for additional new dwellings. So if you take an average over and include existing ones, that average will come down. But for new, it's 20 to 25, and that's a cost. So when it goes back out the door to the public for sale, that goes out at $30,000, and there's no hiding from that. That's business. That's the way business works. If you don't do that, the bank will kick you out the door and you'll never get back in. So I always use this example because it's a good one. On a $500,000 townhouse or apartment, say $495,000, that extra $30,000 takes it up to $525,000. It's a 5% increase. It's really roughly, it's really quite significant. And if you picture, and I often describe it like this too, the pyramid of buyers, so you have the vast bulk of them at the bottom. So if we can take it down another level, then the number of buyers we can appeal to goes way out significantly. So this has an impact at the bottom level, where we can attract far more buyers and get more numbers in. So it really does have a very significant impact. That cost thing, just to stick to the numbers for a moment, it's a very, very low margin business, and that's why you see very little being built out there at the moment. I see the 2 tower cranes have gone up lately, but knowing the background and the detail on those, they're simply paying for it out of their very deep pockets. There's very little being built, and that's because there's very little profit in it. And there are plenty of stories about people who have gone bust trying to break that rule. the rebuild, being active before the earthquakes came along, knocked us for 6, and we got the rebuild underway. We had the whole country in behind us for that. We had the Crown in behind us, all the taxpayers, they all poured in and helped Christchurch rebuild, and also all the ratepayers as well, and you guys and the councillors and all the council staff as well. And we started to get a real momentum, I thought, going. Up until about a year ago, unfortunately, before that tragic day in March when the massacres happened. But I like to picture the momentum in the central city, if you bear with me, a big Flintstone type stone wheel, very, very heavy, and everyone got their shoulders behind it and started rolling it forward, and we started to get traction and places were being built and being filled up. That momentum is slowly moving, but if we stop now, I just fear that that momentum is going to stop and roll backwards and squash us. Now is definitely not the time to pull back from that big stone wheel. We need to keep pushing it forward, because we did have that momentum. The attitude still sits out there in the public's mind. If we just keep our shoulder to the wheel, we'll keep it going. We don't need to hit 25,000 people straight away. All we need to do is get that momentum up. So, for example, if we simply double the central city population within a short number of years, that feeds on itself and gives the whole thing momentum. So with that in mind, if the scheme was stopped right now, I just fear for the central city. I think that the negative of that would be significant and very noticeable. Sorry, my other note here was simply saying that it's not just a negative in terms of the market, but it's also a big negative signal to people like myself. If it gets canned today, I'll probably carry on or try to carry on, but it's a big negative signal to people out there. If you guys can the scheme, it will be why we're wasting our time. I might as well pack my bags and go home. So in my experience, that it's very important that it keeps going. It's only got a little bit left to run in terms of time, and funds are relatively small, so please just keep it going until it's all used up, and then look to put in some other incentives or schemes, which is probably a discussion for another day, like perhaps rebates, which would be the best thing on the planet in my view. And then finally, there was a couple of technical matters which are pretty important in my view. One is that the proposal is talking about registering a covenant on the title. I understand the thought behind the reason for that, but I really struggle with that, and my homeowners won't like that. Having things unnecessarily registered on titles really annoys people, and especially as it's only intended to catch a minority of rule breakers, whereas the vast majority of homeowners, they don't need it. It's nothing to do with them. There's no need for it to go on their title. The other thing about a covenant is it doesn't actually enforce anything. All it is a notice. That notice already exists in the district plan rules. There are no covenants for any other rules in the district plan. If there were, there'd be 1,000 covenants registered on everybody's title. So I understand the thinking behind it, but from a practical perspective and impacting the homeowners that will have that covenant, I don't think it's a good idea. However, if push comes to shove, we'd work with it, but it's going to mean some difficult conversations with our purchasers. The other technical matter is a transition from which the staff have probably got in hand, but transitioning from the existing scheme to an extension. There's two things. Firstly, the rules will change around the covenant and limiting it on the commercial aspect, which is the whole issue that is being discussed. That becomes a bit of a problem when some of us out there have committed to a project on the basis of the previous rules, and if they change on us halfway through, it just creates a total mayhem for us. So I'd just ask that perhaps discretion is given to the council to deal with projects that are already in train, transitioning through to any new set of rules, that they're not caught out and tripped up. The other aspect about transition, and it's the same sort of thing, is the COVID-19 and the lockdown delay. We've only just now got back underway with 2 of our builds underway at the moment since March, so effectively we're sort of 2.5, 3 months already, and we've only just hitting our straps now, so really we need a bit more fat on that. So I'd ask that there's an extension of the existing rules due to COVID-19, which is this period I've just mentioned, plus some fat. So I'd suggest 4 months or something like that for just due to the lockdown and COVID-19. So that's it for me. I've been through that reasonably quickly. I don't know if you have any questions at all.
Well, we allow 10 minutes for a deputation, but I know that you've been engaging directly with staff as well, and we do appreciate, you know, the value of what you bring to the central city, and I know that councillors will take that into account when we make the decision on the paper.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Grant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lindsay Carswell.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Where's Jo? She's going to come. Oh, there it is there. Right. I've sent through to you all. You will have what I sent through last night. I'd like to take you through the economics of the rebate scheme. And the first thing I want to say is the rebate, in fact, is a subsidy. You maybe think it's a rebate, but let's be quite clear about it. It is a straight-out subsidy. And of course, I want to show you in a supply and demand situation how economists treat them. Now, I taught this subject for a number of years, from Form 5 right up to 7 Form Economics or Year 13. And it's still taught. This is the basics of the first diagram I want to show you, which is up here now on the screen. This is the starting point for in microeconomics, a supply and demand diagram. And what we have there on the vertical axis, prices. On the horizontal axis, we have the quantities. We have a downward sloping demand curve. It's downward sloping because as the price drops, consumers purchase more, or it attracts more consumers into the market. We have an upward sloping supply curve, and as the price increases, the firm or the supplier supplies more, or new firms are attracted into the market. Where the two intersect is the equilibrium point, and there we get the market price and the market quantity. The market quantity that will be sold in this particular market, whatever the good is, or service for that matter. And that's the basic starting point in microeconomics. I'm not going to go into how a demand curve is derived. There's a lot of learning you could do in that. I'm not going to go into how the supply curve, it gets quite complex. Let's move on to the next diagram. Oh, just one point I'd like to point out to you before we move on. Have a look at the demand curve above that portion of it, which is above the price line. There are consumers there who are on that demand curve who are willing to pay quite a high price, well above the market price. They don't have to. They only pay the market price. They get a surplus, and it's a benefit to them. I'll come back to that point later on because it's quite an important one. Now let's see if this technology is going to work for me. Right, now we introduce a subsidy into the situation. The subsidy is paid to the producer, and it shifts the supply curve to the right. And the vertical distance then between the original supply curve and the new supply curve is the amount of the subsidy or the rebate that was paid. The price now drops for the consumer to P2, and the quantity increases from Q1 to Q2. There are all sorts of things about subsidies which some people, economists, say they're very inefficient. There are so-called deadweight losses involved and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But I'm going to go into all that, but there's a whole lot of literature you could read about them. The next slide I'm going to show you shows in detail who gets what out of all of this. You can see there that the price has dropped, but the firm gets the price still on the old demand curve, old supply curve. So they're on price P3, what they now receive, and of course, but the consumer only pays P2. The difference is then split between the supplier and the consumer. Now, how much each gets is going to depend on quite a few factors. But in any subsidy situation, the subsidy that is paid out does not go completely to the consumer. Only part of it will. So let's move on to the next slide. This gets a little bit more complex. This is more for year 13 economics, where we talk about elasticities. It's the slope of the demand curve. And the slope will determine how much how much the consumer gets and how much the firm gets out of that subsidy. I'm only going to look at elastic demand curves because they are more appropriate to this situation of the housing market, where consumers have a choice. Buy in the central city, they can buy in the suburbs or whatever. So we have a very elastic demand curve. Not a pure elastic, but a downward sloping, highly elastic demand curve. And if you look closely at it, what happens here is that demand actually increases quite a bit, but the price that the consumer gains is reduced. There's very little in it for them. Can you all understand that, or have I lost you all? The silence is deafening. I presume I've probably lost some of you. Yeah, I can hear the brains tuning over. All right. Are there any questions on that, what I've done showing you there so far? I've only got one more slide ready to go. Sorry, I've got one more slide. Okay, now, the last thing I then want to show you is that... just before we move on, go back to the original equilibrium point and the very elastic one, and remember that all those consumers above the original price, they are not going to be affected by the subsidy. They were willing to buy into this market without the subsidy. The subsidy is only going to affect those who are shifting from Q1 to Q2, the ones who are attracted to the market because of the subsidy. The last slide I'll show you brings a lot of this together. It shows the market there, 500,000 say for a house, and on top of that we've got 10 to 15,000 for your subsidy. The size of the subsidy is lost in the width of that line, the price line. You can't see it because it's so small in comparison to the total situation. The number of consumers who have been attracted to the market is also very small. What I've got in that circle refers to the previous diagram, the elastic demand curve. So really, you're not attracting that many people into it. And the bulk of the subsidy you're paying out is going to the developers. It's not going to the consumer. And I just don't feel that it's been worthwhile having such a scheme. I think the money's gone to the wrong way. There could have been better ways in which to attract people into the central city. You want to ask any question on economics? Ask me.
No, I've got... do you know how many residents that were living in the central city before the earthquakes and how many there are now?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's quite a substantial difference and it ain't a pretty picture. That's why we've got an 8011 project to try and get people living in the central city.
I know that.
You heard the developer speak before. He said that the benefit to him was, the benefit to the purchasers of his properties was between $45,000 and $50,000. So he's obviously talking about less dense developments than the one that you were describing at 10 to 15,000. That would be the minority of developments in the central city.
There's been a couple of newspaper articles recently about this.
You got your information from the newspaper.
Yeah, that's
quoted no, that's in good.
It, you know,
and just my last question is in relation to the challenge of the high land values in the central city. Because you know there are lots of businesses that have basically set up in the central city ahead of some of the developments that were promised under the blueprint, you know, the stadium and the convention centre and all of those different assets that were coming into the centre of the city. The key was, though, getting people living there. So do you think we're being successful leaving people to just go with no, even though the development contributions are for the infrastructure, and we've developed the infrastructure in the central city in a way that we haven't in, say, greenfield areas?
No, wait a minute, what was the question?
Well, the development contributions go to the infrastructure. You've talked about it being a subsidy coming from ratepayers, but actually it's foregone development contributions in an area where the development contributions are not required to the same extent.
Well, it's still a subsidy.
Okay, all right. Well, we're just...
What you need to do is, look,
yeah.
take the area from just out here, Montreal Street to Rolleston Avenue, that living area, and all down to Victoria Street all the way round there. When you look at it, what I'd be worried about if I was living in the area is this constant creep of commercialisation into the area.
I agree.
You know, that's the way the hospital sort of sneaked in a little bit. You've got a Casual Street, you've got a Wilson's car park in a residential area.
They can't get the return on their investment. But Aaron, you had a question.
I noticed that one of your slides was a farm subsidy slide, and I totally agree that on food subsidies it really does skew the market.
I don't copy and paste out of a textbook.
Yeah. And you are correct that it does. There's some dire consequences to farm subsidies, and New Zealand might pay the price in potatoes very soon because of a offload from Europe. But in property, this is different because the Mayor raised that this is, the DCs are a charge for something that's already there. So some people say the complete opposite, that the DCs shouldn't be charged in the city at all, that it's not a rebate. This is a charge that shouldn't be there. And so that's my question to you. Is should you be charging for something that's already there? Whereas in the suburbs, she's correct, that it's not there, so you're paying for an infrastructure.
There must be some infrastructure you have to put in.
It's quite different from greenfields.
Yeah,
I think that's the point that we're making.
Yeah.
And I think the other point that we're making is that in terms of the actual impact that it has, and I think you heard from the developer saying it's the competition with those very close suburbs. See, I mean, in Auckland, the competition is miles away, and here the competition is very close, and you can buy. I mean, you'd spend $100,000 less and get more just in the perimeter than in the central city. I think that was his point, that you can bring down the price of the central city ones. That was his point.
Well, you have to. I'm not sure what the assets that you need the infrastructure you need to put it and all that there. That gets complex and it's beyond my.
It is. It's good, but thank you very much for your.
But anyway, I still stand
submission.
by the fact that I don't think you should be handing out a subsidy. That's all.
No, that's very clear. Thank you. And that's enough time for David Lynch to have had arrived, and I will now invite him to the table.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and apologies for lateness. I did submit on the 14th of May a very late communication setting out some concerns, and it isn't my intention to necessarily go over that, but just to set the scene, first I want to make it clear I'm here in a private capacity. Our family has an investment property in Hagley Avenue, and we're concerned about two specific Airbnb developments that were originally put forward as residential developments and were very quickly promoted to investors for Airbnb. So I'm making these additional comments, I guess, to my communication of the 14th of May in a private capacity. I want to make that clear. So as the council will be aware, I have made a number of deputations way back on the 5th of Feb in 2018 when Williams Corporation advised of their intentions, and then we suddenly learnt that what they were proposing to build, which what the council had consented for, wasn't anything to do with residential. It was a commercial development, and we had concerns in respect to the fact that when a developer fronts up to this council and makes a declaration, this is what I intend building, and suddenly we learn that the outcome is very different from what they've actually signed off. We had hoped that the council might have taken a slightly stronger view as to responding to these sort of challenges, but as recently as the Mirrorvale Lane development, we see that once again it's been left to the poor old residents to fight the battle, and the residents are left on their own. So I guess my comment would simply be this. You've developed a scheme, a rebate to encourage residential development. It should only be applied to residential development and not those developments that are being used specifically to service Airbnb. There is no issue with Airbnb. However, I know that my colleagues from the moteliers here will raise concerns about that. My comment is where they are put forward, very clearly stated what the intent is, they should be measured and they should meet the same charges that commercial developments should be required to meet. So my comments, I guess, in summing up, would be that I would encourage this council not to support a residential rebate where it's clearly being used for the purpose of Airbnb, and that secondly, where it's been proven that Airbnb has received this rebate, I would request that the CEO might like to seek clarification from the Auditor General's office as to whether or not that rebate should be repaid to this council. Thank you.
Right, my question relates to the difference between the paper that was going to be introduced that received all the publicity compared to the paper we're now actually considering today,
yes,
which addresses the specific issue, which is to bring in the question of covenants for titles, to make it crystal clear that it is not for Airbnb developments.
Right. Well, I would encourage the council to obviously support that.
Okay.
And on the matter of the clarification about whether rebates have been paid, I would formally like to request that the CEO seeks advice from the Auditor General as to whether, in fact, there is an issue with that.
The trouble is that, and you know, the issue is, well, there's the difference between, like you use the Mirrorvale one and the Hagley Ave one. In terms of Mirrorvale, there's a question of the district plan and what the district plan allows. In the central city, Airbnb is allowed throughout the throughout the 4 avenues, within the 4 avenues, the core, the city core, yeah. So it is there. It's specifically provided for in the district plan. So they're 2 separate issues. But this proposal that we have in front of us today is absolutely explicit about the go forward, which is that it is not for apartments that are to be put on the Airbnb market.
Right. Okay. Joe, I just also wish to acknowledge Jake McClelland. I understand that he's taken a rather interesting course as an independent councillor over a matter that I understand the council was originally considering, and that was the way developments were being promoted, and reference to the council not having any staff to look after reinforcement of those developments that are operating as Airbnb. I commend Jake for that. I commend Yanni as well, who's been very active in this area. And it does surprise me that it's been left to a councillor to pursue an obvious Commerce Commission matter, and why the full council isn't choosing to do that.
No, sorry, the organisation has absolutely taken up that issue, and that arose specifically out of the Mirrorvale Lane decision, because there were issues about, there was a challenge made, essentially, that there was an application being made that wasn't representing factually what the developer was doing. The developer changed the provisions, and the commissioner actually was quite explicit in his decision, where he said that he had to accept he had to accept what the application said. He couldn't challenge that. So, but all of that will be absolutely monitored, and we object entirely as a total council, both from a governance point of view, but from a staff point of view, to people misrepresenting the situation. And if it is brought to our attention, and if we are able to follow up, we will follow up, and we do not simply turn a blind eye, which I think was the assertion.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got Bob Pringle, Chairman, Peer-to-Peer Committee, Accommodation Sector Chairman, Hospitality New Zealand. Thank you very much for coming in this afternoon.
Thanks, Ron. On the accommodation sector of Canterbury branch of Hospitality New Zealand, not of the whole of New Zealand, I'd like to congratulate the council for their thought of putting the covenant on these places. We heard Mr. MacKinnon, the developer, said he can live with it. I've circulated my dossier that we put together here. I'll just talk to it. We heard before about Airbnbs are able to be had within the 4 avenues. Under the Building Act, that's not quite true, I don't feel. If we're going to have Airbnbs there, it's commercial accommodation. Commercial accommodation is different. So we have to have people, and I said this last time I was here, safe in buildings. This is why we'd like to see the whole accommodation industry in Christchurch to be registered, have a number, be compliant. It's on the first day, not the last day. It'd be interesting to see in our one submission plus in Hospitality New Zealand about the My Cafe in Mount Pleasant, how it was quite quickly enforced the district plan. We've got big problems with accommodation industry in Christchurch, especially with COVID. We've had some people switch out of Airbnb, and this is a wee bit off this, but these places here are being built for them and being things. What we want is compliance on these, and the ones that have been built too. Because does this council want to have accommodation in Christchurch or not? We're a pretty sad state at the moment with pre-COVID 30% of accommodation in Christchurch going to Airbnb, an unregulated market. No safety signs, nothing protecting those people, no health and safety. It's a major concern of mine personally, plus the accommodation industry in Christchurch. This is why I congratulate to put the covenants on these, because people have to be aware. Mr. Horncastle and Robin Horncastle was in the paper today said about the, we're like China having these things here. I thought he was like Robin Hood. He was trying to fleece the people. If it's not viable to do it, why should they do it? And if we're going to have people in town here, the policies of the council here is to cycleways and walks and stuff. Well, these people, and you look outside of most of these developments, and the one I see mostly is the one down on the corner of Hadley Park there. How many cars outside there all the time? The poor kids going to those netball kids when it starts up in the next couple of weeks, where are they going to park? Because there's no parks there at all. So I congratulate the council on it, and I'd like to see this extended through. And if we're going to have these things used for accommodation, then they should all be fire celled, just like a commercial building, to keep the people safe in them. How are those people going to get out of that top story when smoke comes through? We've had fires in motels and hotels in Christchurch. We had one a few months ago, and it was put out in the unit. No damage to anything. They got out quite safely. We had the house over on Cashmere. Had a deadbolt on the door. People just don't realise that there's other things other than fire. If they've got deadbolts and people can't get out of them, they're locked in there. You cook inside of them. So it's pretty important that we start and look at this. And this is just one of the points that Hospitality New Zealand and myself in particular, and the accommodation sector generally, because we've been putting submissions in on various things, are concerned of the way forward for this. You know, we've got one compliance officer for this section where we've got 24 for parking. Well, perhaps if we had 24 pre-COVID, we could have a lot more accommodation open a lot quicker than what we have now. You know, we have to have our priorities right of what we see. You know, what's the difference if I park in the park here for another 10 minutes or a half an hour, or if I park in someone's house and the house burns down? Airbnb, you have to realise, this can only be permitted if the people are there. If the people aren't on site, this is my belief that it's run as an illegal operation. There's quite a groundswell in Christchurch of people looking to take the council to task on this, and about the amount that is available in Christchurch. But I must give you credit where credit's due, and I'll support your motion to have covenants on these ones, so the people are absolutely clear. There's not developers going to be selling them as Airbnb where they're not. And if we want people in 20,000 in town, we don't want them changing every night. We want to get communities going in town. I think this is the most important thing of what this policy was, is to get people into town, to live in town, to work in town, to enjoy town. This isn't. If there's a cheaper option from outside the avenues, so be it.
Look, thank you very much, and thank you for noticing that we'd updated the paper. I think the reason that I pulled it off the agenda when I did was because I knew that a narrative had started around it that was just the complete opposite of what councillors wanted to achieve. They wanted to make it crystal clear that we weren't going to allow people that were utilising it for Airbnb to claim the rebate. And it is to that extent that we wanted to really find a way of resolving that. Unfortunately, the paper said we're going to now work on a way of doing that rather than actually putting in the solution. And the solution is the covenant. That's what we've come up with. We've heard one of the developers say that creates a difficult conversation with some of the clients that they're dealing with. But at the end of the day, he said, I'd rather have that than have this scheme fall over, because it does matter that $40,000 to $50,000 does make a difference when you're talking about the margins of our centre of the city being in a similar price range for so much more.
But if it's 50 cents off my rates, it would be a difference to me too.
Yeah, it's not 50 cents off your rates.
But if you collected, it would be.
No, because it's for development contributions, and the extent of the requirements are not the same in the CBD as they are in greenfields spaces.
But wouldn't it go towards the surge and infrastructure?
I'm being told off by Yanni for debating the issue, but I really appreciate the fact that you've come to provide your support based on a very clear understanding that we are not doing this for the Airbnb market.
Thank you.
Thank you.